Welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast. My name is Jim, and this episode is sponsored by NFL Draft Fanatics. This episode is going to cover the Ole Miss-Oklahoma game and some of the higher-ranked players on the board that are playing in the game. So, as we're about halfway through the college football season, we have a preliminary board. The board changes daily as scouting reports and other information comes in. But let's go ahead and take a look at the Oklahoma players playing in the Oklahoma-Ole Miss game. So there's several players you want to see right at the top. The top two on defense, Danny Stutsman and Billy Bowman from Oklahoma. So Danny Stutsman is a linebacker. Billy Bowman is a safety. Both of them are, I want to say, consensus top 100 players. Nearly every board I look at has Stutsman in the top 100, and not everybody has Bowman in the top 100, but the people I respect and that I talk to have Bowman in the top 100, if that makes any sense. So definitely focus on the Oklahoma defense. On the flip side, when Oklahoma is on offense, observe wide receiver Deion Burks. And the question you want to ask yourself is Burks a day two wide receiver, right? Are you taking him somewhere on day three, somewhere in rounds 4 through 7? Or is there enough there that you see where you would be comfortable taking a second or third round pick on Deion Burks? And then a couple of other players to pay attention to on Oklahoma. I'm gonna move all the way down to the edge. So specifically, Dason McCullough and R. Mason Thomas. So these are definitely players that I'm gonna use the term like come on or have risen up draft boards. So R. Mason Thomas definitely is, let's say, a relatively new name, but that would be somebody I would pay attention to on Oklahoma. To just ask yourself, is this a player who I would be taking early on day 3 of the draft, or does he even get into the top 100? So that would be the question I would ask about those Oklahoma edges. Also want to give a shout out to Jacob Sexton, the offensive tackle from Oklahoma. And the reason that I want to point out is that this offensive tackle class has a few players that are hurt. And in addition to that, there aren't necessarily a lot of like, yeah, I need a tackle and that tackle is my guy if a team is picking early in the draft, which means teams that need offensive linemen might be looking to fill that more in the later rounds. So definitely just observe Jacob Sexton from Oklahoma, offensive tackle. And also Gentry Williams, corner from Oklahoma, would be another player to monitor. And I believe Gentry Williams would be a day 3 grade as well. Flipping it to Ole Miss, definitely a lot of players from Ole Miss to pay attention to. So right at the top, Ole Miss has 2 defensive players that are top 60 players. And it would not shock me if the top 2 players from Ole Miss are first-round picks by the time the draft comes in April. So Princely Umanmielen, edge from Ole Miss, bendy edge. And there's probably 7 edges on the board right around Princely's grade. So the question would be, can Princely separate himself in a positive way by moving up the board and possibly getting into that top 20 draft pick category? So something to look at from Princely. Walter Nolan, he is an athletic defensive lineman. So he would be more of your 3 technique or your 5 technique defensive lineman. Probably not putting him over the nose. You're probably putting him over a guard or shading him to a tackle. Highly athletic, though, so definitely take a look at Walter Nolan, defensive lineman from Ole Miss. And not to be outdone, Trey Harris, the wide receiver from Ole Miss, is also in the top 100 of most boards at this point. So when Ole Miss is on offense, I would definitely be paying attention to the next three players in the list: Trey Harris, Antwain Wells, and Jackson Dart. Okay. The question you would want to ask yourself with Harris, is he a top 5 wide receiver in this class, right? And there are 4 wide receivers that are really high on the board. Ask yourself, is Trey Harris one of the top 5 wide receivers? Is he pushing himself to the point where he's moving up the draft board and a team is going to take him in the late first? Okay, so for example, Kansas City Chiefs, Buffalo Bills, Baltimore Ravens, probably picking at the, back 10 picks of round 1. Is Trey Harris a wide receiver that would make those wide receiver rooms better for any of those playoff teams that need a wide receiver? So ask yourself if he's a round 1, specifically a late round 1 wide receiver. Jackson Dart, from a quarterback standpoint, he needs to play himself into day 2 is the way I would like to describe it. So Dart, definitely a draftable grade. He will see his name called. And if you think about the draft this past season, I believe it was 6 quarterbacks went in round 1, and then no quarterback went until day 3, meaning there were no second or third round quarterbacks. All the quarterbacks that weren't round 1 dropped to day 3. So Jackson Dart, there would be a question would be, do you take him in round 2 or 3, or you're just going to roll the dice and wait until rounds 4, 5, 6, or 7 to take him? That's, I believe, what Dart has on the line as far as his draft stock goes for the remainder of the season. Okay, so this episode of Mrs. R Relevant, which is a daily draft podcast, is sponsored by NFL Draft Fanatics. NFL Draft Fanatics is the only interactive mock draft simulator, and interactive means that the fans control the big board by picking players. And if you pick a player in round 3, the player moves up to the board for that team close to a round 3 grade. And then other users which use the simulator will frequently see that player go in round 3 to the team that you selected him for. So the boards constantly move around. The more people that use the simulator, the more random the simulator gets. So feel free to check that out. Also want to give a shout out to the Mrs. R Relevant podcast. We are beginning our positional scouting report series, and that will debut on Friday. We don't have the time of that podcast. It will likely be either 7 or 8 p.m. Eastern. And we're going to have 3 of us talking about wide receivers and cornerbacks. We're going to talk about 12 to 14 players on the episode, a couple of mid players, a couple of players in the top 100, and then a couple of players that are much further down the draft board. And we're just going to kind of chat what the scouting reports are on all of those players. The episode should take us 60 to 75 minutes to complete, and we will be repeating that to try to cover most of the wide receivers that are on the board and most of the defensive backs or corners that are on the board. So feel free to check that out on Friday. We did something similar last weekend. The chat was quite active, and they were asking about specific players. So we said, okay, let's just launch a series, and we're going to start covering the scouting reports and the players. So if you're interested in that, check us out on Friday. Please follow, and subscribe to the NFL Draft Fanatics YouTube channel, and follow us on Twitter or X at NFL Draft Fanatic. There is no I in Fanatic on our Twitter. So thank you very much for listening to this episode. My name is Jim. On behalf of NFL Draft Fanatics, remember, every day can be your draft day if you have the right attitude. Thank you very much and have a great day.